We have on the phone with us, I believe, Yancey Roy. Hello, Yancey. Are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on, and I think we're going to have a good talk about the third track, the plan. Tell us what's in your article about the third track plan.
Well, the big news this week was that the third track got the green light from state officials, and essentially this was the okay to put in the funding, about $2 billion worth, into a long-term capital plan for upgrades throughout the Metro Transit system, and specifically for a third Long Island track, which is essentially about a 10-mile corridor that runs from roughly Floral Park out to Hicksville.
Right. What do you think of the timing?
Well, the interesting thing here is sort of how this played out over the last couple of weeks. The MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, had proposed a long-term funding plan which included the third track, and that plan had to be acted upon by the end of June by a very obscure but powerful board that is controlled by the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly. Each one has one vote, and any negative vote can scuttle plans altogether. This is sort of not unusual for state government to have a setup like that, especially on big projects. Longtime residents remember about 10 years ago or so, the state assembly single-handedly killed Michael Bloomberg's plan for a Jet Stadium on the west side of Manhattan. Right. So with that deadline looming at the end of June, there was a lot of speculation that the Senate, which is led by basically a block of Long Island Republicans, might veto this project, specifically because of opposition in Floral Park and New Hyde Park and other areas. So with the specter of the veto looming at the end of June, the MTA pulled the plan back and withdrew it. Meanwhile, which stopped the clock, it gave it a new 30 days. Meanwhile, they were working to get agreements with those two villages to do some parking, station improvements, other quality of life improvements. Those villages then signed off an agreement with the MTA agreeing to these improvements, and after that happened, the state Senate announced we're going to back the funding proposal for the third track.
Right. Now, where does this money come from?
Well, it's going to be a long-term project. It's, by and largely bonded money, which basically means borrowing for the state, and it is several years off before anything moves forward. In fact, some of the critics of the project, maybe specifically Senator Elaine Phillips from Flower Hill, had said there's so many problems with the MTA, things that need to be fixed right now. We should be earmarking money for those things and wait to do something like a third track.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I noticed in it they mention how that the Long Island Railroad promised, actually supporters say it'll be a major boon to the region, allowing the LIRR to run more trains in both directions. It'll create jobs, I don't know how many of those, but boost property values and keep more young people in Nassau and Suffolk counties. I kind of think, my first reaction to that is, no, cheap housing keeps people in Nassau County, not a low-cost train ride.
Well, the boosters had lined up a lot of those arguments on their side, especially business groups who think it would be good for the region. Also, certainly unions who would like to get all of the jobs for constructing a third track. But
those are not long-time jobs. Those are for as long as the project lasts, and then they disappear.
Right.
I don't personally think they should be able to take those jobs for. Some impact, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a job that you can keep for 30 years.
And, there had been some other transportation experts who'd say that a long-term solution to better transportation and congestion is not necessarily a third track. There'd be other really big solutions, such as an elevated train or what have you. One track is not necessarily going to make a huge difference.
Right. It's funny because after reading the article, it reminds me of if they had initially, when they built the Long Island Expressway, put a monorail down the middle of that road, we wouldn't be talking about any of these things right now.
Well, I think there's other folks who have said similar sorts of things, that the long-term, decades-long sort of strategy planning isn't always what gets funded, especially by government.
Well, all right. It's just that, because here to me, and, I'm not trying to put it down or anything, but it seems like a Band-Aid. And 10 years from now, they're going to be asking us to put another third track from, I don't know, point A to point B. You pick it. I don't see, do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
It just drives me nuts. And I think $2 billion is not chump change. Not that would even put a dent in trying to put a monorail down the Long Island Expressway. But, we could have saved all of this agita with all of these little pieces. I don't know. Every time I see a new project like this, I would really love to be the guy who follows the dollar from where it's sitting now and how it goes through the system. Mm-hmm. Because it just seems to me, and it could, just anecdotal evidence, but it seems to me that whatever net they use has big holes in it. And every time they move that money, a little of it disappears.
Well, it's one of the things that newspapers try to do, follow how state government is spending taxpayers' money to see how these projects play out, whether the money's spent appropriately, whether it's used effectively. Certainly the folks who had backed the third track proposal had lined up a lot of momentum on their side coming into this year and setting up the vote to get the capital plan approved. I think there was a big push from Governor Cuomo, obviously.
Yeah.
There was also a big push, like I say, from the unions and from the business groups. And, I think also you can't, you talk about the timing, you can't ignore the fact that the MTA is having, and Amtrak are having lots of problems, of course, in Penn Station. It's been called the summer of hell for commuters. And something like this, politically, is seen as something that might tamp down at least a little of that criticism. And I think that's why there was a little bit of a push to get this done this year.
Well, do you think perception...
To get the funding done anyway.
Get the funding. Yeah. Well, perception-wise, do you think it looks like progress? Is that what you mean by tamping down the other? I think it adds fuel to the fire.
Well, I think that's from a political standpoint, I think that's what boosters are kind of hoping for, is to show, hey, while we're dealing with the ongoing problems, we're also planning for the future. Now, you could certainly be skeptical about whether it is going to work out in the future as well as some folks hope.
It sounds like, you need your assets to deal with the issue at hand. Why would you start another problem or another endeavor that's going to, take your assets and split them maybe a little bit?
It's going to be interesting to watch throughout the summer when we get through the end of the season into Labor Day, and supposedly the work will be done and things will be sort of back to normal. But over the next few months, it's going to be very interesting, not just for the daily lives of everyone trying to come in and out of Manhattan, but also how this plays out politically for the governor and for lots of other folks involved.
Yeah. Over the long run, I see, I'll take out my crystal ball because I really, but what I do see is, a lot of development going on, single bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments, but the rents on these things are pretty big, and a lot of them seem to be planned around the rails. In other words, I think the impression I get is that the push is to have people living in areas where they take a train and get rid of your car.
I think you've seen a push for sort of cluster development in spots, for sure. It's come to mind, I often get off at the Farmingdale stop, for example, in the LIRR.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
And they make a...
I'm from Farmingdale.
They've made a big push to sort of build up around there, apartment buildings, other little places to shop or eat or have a cup of coffee, and try to make it more of a hub of activity. The idea being that if you can encourage more mass transit, you get more cars off the road, less pollution, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I see, in most development, you see this now. I see it in Farmingdale. I was shocked the other night. I didn't know exactly where the buildings were, because if you drive down Main Street in Farmingdale, you really don't see much changes, other than that most of the storefronts are now restaurants and bars. You see changes when you take Secatog, a street that is parallel to Main Street and in the back. And then, you come around a corner and you see this apartment or this complex. It took me back. It really did. I'm a lifelong resident of Farmingdale, and I remember those back streets there, and now it's starting to look like a metropolis. The one obvious thing is there really aren't any parking lots. Mm-hmm. And so that was built with that idea that the train system was going to be the big thing. But the other side of that is these are not apartments for young people. At least I don't think so. With rents at $2,000 and $3,000 a month, people starting out in jobs can't afford to live here. So those trains are not to keep young people on Long Island. I think most of those apartments are going to retirees and people who actually work in the city and make decent salaries that they're not necessarily going to make in Farmingdale. I don't know.
It's a complicated puzzle.
Yeah, it really is. I'm curious, what are they driving at? What is their vision? We got to add some trains and all. Okay, this is not to keep young people on Long Island. Maybe I'm being cynical. But they are developing places where there's going to be concentrations of population. They got to move them around, but they're not making any provisions for, car. They're actually kind of putting that down.
Well, back up and take a broader view. Governor Cuomo, now in his 7th year, has certainly made a priority of trying to do a lot of infrastructure projects, things that are often big, splashy, things you can have a ribbon cutting about, such as a Second Avenue subway, a new Tappan Zee Bridge, a new third track of Long Island. Yep. There's a lot of debate on the effectiveness of this, and years from now, how well will this all play out?
Right.
There's certainly arguments to be made by proponents about redoing a lot of the infrastructure in New York, and at the same time, there's a lot of arguments from the other side that says whether it's rails, whether it's highways, whether it's sewer systems, which people really don't pay a lot of attention to because they're underground and they're hard to take a lot of credit for. Those are the sort of the things that long-term need to be fixed as opposed to the sort of showpieces. Now,
right.
Those are all questions that end up getting answered a lot later than you and I talking right now.
Yeah, right. Well, out of your 3 examples, I think the Tappan Zee Bridge was necessary only because nobody wants to see it fall down. I don't think New York would have fallen apart if we didn't have a Second Avenue subway. So, yes, as a showpiece, I think that's one of them. Mm-hmm. The Tappan Zee, though, when the divers down there came back up and said the pilings on the bottom, I can put my hand around the piling, which means it's deteriorated to a point where that bridge is going to fall down. You say, nobody wants to be the guy in charge.
Right. Absolutely. Again, there's a lot of need, a lot of infrastructure need, and then the political haggling gets done over, well, what need and what piece and what, what bridge and what track and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, Yancey, I hope you keep an eye on this and keep reporting. Let us know how the war goes.
We'll do our best.
Yeah, it's certainly, it's interesting. And to me, it came out of the blue. I was like, why would they do this now with everything they have, everything else they have on their plate? What is this about?
Well, again, I think the push to the MTA had to put forth a capital plan, and I think part of the push to get it done in June or July of this year, I think, is obviously timed to the fact that they're fighting on a PR front all of the problems that are happening with Penn Station.
Yeah, really. Well, I'm just thankful I do not have to commute. How about you? You don't commute, do you?
Well, I'm up here in Albany, kind of keeping an eye on the state capitol and all of the Long Island doings and Long Island angles for folks. So.
Oh, very cool. Okay. All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you for calling in, and we want to thank Newsday for saying that's cool to do. But listen, keep